I'm pleased to be with you this morning. My name is Nick Siemens. I am the Director of the Office of International Affairs. I'm new to the University of Chicago since last November. My alma mater is just up the street in Evanston, where I was also working for a little while. But I have, switched, for the most part, color from purple to maroon, and I'm seeing some maroon, out there as well. I'm thrilled to see it. As other folks are kind of joining, I'm just interested, for how many of you is this your first child that you're dropping off? Any? All right, majority. Anybody, is this the second or third time for anybody? No? Okay. That's good, right? Well, it has to be recognized that this is a pivotal moment and a giant step, not only for your child, but also, for you as parents, and more so as, in my line of work, for international parents. Because of the vast and dramatic differences between, perhaps what your child, is used to, or maybe they went to, your child went to school in the United States, maybe not. In any case, the University of Chicago is unique, like every college, and probably you visited a couple of them as you were trying to decide, or your child was trying to decide, to which school they wanted to actually apply and ultimately come. I've got some very brief information here for you today. We passed out a handout that I think can be helpful. This is similar information for the most part to what your child is going to receive over the course of the next week. I will say today's a big day for you all, right? Like this is the convocation and everything else that goes on. But it's an exciting day. And before we know it, classes here at the University of Chicago will actually start next Monday. So just a little bit about the Office of International Affairs. Like so many other resources that you will learn about over the course of this morning, the university has an office dedicated specifically to international students, right? So help in navigating visa and immigration regulations in the United States. That is kind of the baseline for the Office of International Affairs, and then providing some supportive programming. So questions about traveling in the United States, questions about traveling abroad, social security numbers and driver's license. We will meet with your students over the course of the week, to come, and we will try to impart to them as much information as we think that they can absorb. We always say, and you'll see on your handout, what are the top, 5 things we want a new student to the University of Chicago to remember, specifically in relation to visa status, being new in Chicago, being new at the University of Chicago, and what some of those things mean. So we are a team of 15, in addition, to your student's academic advisor. If the student joins clubs or has other advisors, we are one of many resources on this campus and available to answer questions about anything. You'd be amazed at what we kind of see come through the door. Things like, I'm moving off campus and I don't know, what is a normal rental contract or a lease, meant to look like, and a variety of other things. So we're there to help. The University of Chicago is an international institution, as you all know, and we are pleased with the recent rankings from the U.S. News and World Report, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. In any case, roughly an international population of just over 7,000 total. And that includes international students at all 3 levels, undergraduate, master's, and PhD. We work also with international scholars and researchers and faculty, of which, as you can see on the slide, close to 2,000. And then there are accompanying families. So if they have a spouse or partner or children, we are also trying to provide some supportive programming for those populations as well. Just in terms of the student population, however, you'll notice here that the undergraduate international population of the total international population is quite large. And actually, it's quite large even within the college. At any one time, close to 13-14% of the current college population is international. At any one time, international students at the University of Chicago represent over 110 countries. And typical of, the national average or the national statistics across the country, across the United States, top sending countries do include China, India, and South Korea, and that is the same here at the University of Chicago as well. I had embedded a video here, but we will send you the link to it because, as you know, with computers and technology anymore, with PowerPoint, it seems like you embed it and it works. It worked this morning, and then you bring it and you plug it in, and then it doesn't work. It's just buzzard's luck, as they call it. So again, the Office of International Affairs, here to serve your student, also to act as a resource for you as parents. If ever you have questions or would like to understand maybe what your student is conveying to you in terms of an internship, the authorization, or permission for that internship, what does your student need to travel home, for example, over the winter break, and a variety of other things, you can always either contact me. Your student is assigned an advisor as part of the college, and her contact information is on the sheet in front of you. Her name is Sarah Tolman. She's a delight and is always willing to act as a resource for parents. But I like to meet with parents because we are kind of in this together, right? We are here to, as I said, help your student understand the nuance of being in the United States at a politically challenging time, which can be very interesting in terms of the discourse and conversations, that are going to be had in classes, but it also means that things are challenging in terms of students actually finding internships, being able to secure visa sponsorship at the end of their graduation here in the United States. Perhaps by then we'll have a different administration, but you never know. But in general, travel has become precarious, as we know, and we want to ensure that your students not only take the opportunity to go home and to come home and visit, and to have that break from, the rigor of, being at school, but as they re-enter or come back to the University of Chicago, they're not experiencing challenges at the airport, in terms of secondary inspections or delays or anything, along those lines. And so I say again, we act in partnership with you as parents. So remind your child, as we will remind your child, don't forget your passport. Don't forget your I-20. Do you have all of the relevant documents that you might need, not only to travel home or to wherever you might be going, but also then to return? And if not, that's not insurmountable. There are ways for us to ensure that updated or new copies of immigration documents like I-20s or DS-2019s can actually be sent to, to your child abroad. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. One of the things that we like to tell students is that they are, of course, responsible for their immigration status while they're in the United States. We are there to help guide them through that process and hope that that if they have questions or need assistance or help, that they are in fact reaching out to us. We will tell them time and again over the course of the next week, and as you see them today, feel free to remind them for us as well, to take photos on their phones of their passport, their visa stamp, right? Their immigration document, the I-20 or DS-2019. Often those documents are far easier to replace with a copy, right, than they are without one. And we have seen success, and maybe not super recently, but where students may have forgotten an immigration document and been able to use a photo of it as they were entering the United States. Again, that may or may not apply any longer, but typically. And I will say one more thing about travel. We as an institution and the Office of International Affairs maintain a very close working relationship both with Customs and Border Protection at O'Hare International Airport, but also at Midway International Airport. So if your student is flying into one of those locations late, and there seems or is a question about his or her documentation, They have my cell phone number and are not afraid to use it, unfortunately, at different times of the morning or late night. And we appreciate that. We are very lucky to be in a city like Chicago that is cosmopolitan, that has a very well-served international airport at O'Hare. And that means that as your students are entering, if they are entering and passing through U.S. Customs and Passport Control here in Chicago, that if there is a question, they know how to reach out to the University of Chicago. They know how to get in touch with me personally. And we do our best to ensure that they know who our students are as they're coming in. So typically, while your student is in class or in his or her academic program here at the university, while the student is on either an F1 or a J1 student visa, there are 3 things that the student is required to carry in order to re-enter the United States after a departure. The first, of course, is a valid passport. And we always ask students, do you know the expiration date of your passport? And as parents, you probably know the expiration date of not only your own, but also your child's passport. Your child may not actually be aware. Maybe he or she is, and that's wonderful. But we always like to remind them, if you need a new passport, U.S. immigration requires that your passport be valid 6 months into the future from your next dated arrival. So it may actually be that your child's passport expires over the course of the next 4 years. And that just means that he or she will need to think about reapplying or renewing a passport either here in the United States through your country's consulate or embassy, or while your child is at home, whichever is easiest. For any citizen except those coming from Canada, asterisk, at least for now, the relationship there, continues to be precarious. The second requirement there is that affixed within the passport is an unexpired visa stamp. That visa stamp is simply for entry purposes only, in tandem with an unexpired or valid I-20 or DS-2019, which are the immigration documents. The I-20 is an immigration document related to the F-1 visa, and the DS-2019, the immigration document related to the J-1 visa, right? So those 2 documents, along with the valid passport, ensures that your child, enters the United States in the correct visa status, for the duration of his or her program. We often tell students over the course of the next 4 years, as you are traveling home and re-entering, even if that happens to be over a summer holiday, here, that you should always use your I-20 or DS-2019 and related student visa, right? So that visa superseding either a B1, B2 tourist or visitor visa or ESTA clearance. It ensures that the student remains in student status for that 4 years and is also at that point eligible for all of the related benefits related specifically to internships and off-campus employment authorization and the like. Any questions about that? We indicate to students, to carry, of course, these documents when traveling internationally. We encourage them to travel, domestically here within the United States, and if they are doing that, only to carry with them government-issued identification. At a certain point, they might be eligible for a driver's license or maybe not in the state of Illinois, but otherwise to board any sort of aircraft in the United States, you would have to have or present government-issued photo ID. So whether that's a passport or a passport card or some other type of government-issued photo identification, that's what's required.
Sure.
Yes?
Just a brief question. Her son attended 3 years of high school in the U.S., so his visa is still, well, it was originally committed by the high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's due to expire next year. And what would be the procedure for renewing that F1 visa while he's here?
Yeah.
To go abroad?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question. The question is, my child's been here in a high school, was issued a visa that is still valid, but that will expire within a year or 2, perhaps. At what point, should we apply for the renewed visa? Can we do that in the United States, or do we have to do it at a U.S. consulate or embassy abroad? The first part of that is that it is not possible, ridiculously, to renew the F1 or J1 student visa in the United States. It does require going through nearly the same process that your child went through the first go round, right? So scheduling an appointment with the U.S. consulate or embassy, taking all of the relevant documents at that time, and renewing the visa. It doesn't mean that you have to wait for the expiration, right? So your child now has an immigration document that should, that is valid now for the next 4 years through June of 2022. If you feel like, winter break of this year is a good time to actually, secure that appointment and go through that process, by all means. But certainly not something you have to wait for the expiration of. On the other hand, if your child's visa stamp does expire while he or she is in the United States, it is not required that they travel immediately to renew that, the visa stamp in the passport. So remember that the visa stamp in the passport is for entry purposes. For legal, compliance, the ability to stay in the United States for an extended period of time is based, again, on that I-20 or DS-2019 and those validity dates. And that just means that if your child is here and the visa stamp itself expires, the next time he or she travels home, then he or she would need to go through the visa appointment and acquisition process once more. Occasionally we get questions about students applying for or renewing their visa in a third country. Canada is a good example of this, where students, and we see this maybe more often with graduate students, but students who don't maybe, have the time or want to travel all the way home in order to go through the visa process once more will actually go to Canada and renew at the U.S. Embassy or consulate there. Again, as that relationship becomes more and more tenuous, we'll see what, happens. But for now, at least, that is an option as well. We always recommend that if possible, the student is applying in his or her home country or country of citizenship. Right? That's a great question. Anything else about those 3 documents or understanding the three pieces here of immigration: passport, visa stamp, and I-20 or DS-2019? Yes?
What is the travel signature?
Yeah, so the travel signature is perhaps one of the most archaic government, regulations related to the student visa, and it is a signature that is provided by the Office of International Affairs and is valid for a 12-month period. In effect, the government wants to see that the student has, been, of course, maintaining his or her immigration status, but also maintaining his or her academic status at the university. And so we will, again, remind your student that, every 12 months, he or she will need to obtain an updated, handwritten, again, archaic, signature from the Office of International Affairs. It's a very easy thing to do. I will say one other thing. It is most often that I hear from students, in the middle of the night, when they've realized already that they've traveled home and the travel signature on their I-20 or DS-2019 has expired. That is not a reason to pay for shipping of an updated, document at this point. The student will, again, passing through customs or passport control here at Chicago O'Hare, will actually be allowed entry, maybe permitted conditional entry, at which point the student is required to come into the office. We will provide an updated signature, and then the student will actually, or the office will mail to the government, any relevant or required documentation to sort through that process. Yeah, good question, yes?
If a child wants to travel to other country during the break,
Yep.
possible to get a visa in the United States or Europe?
Yeah, so the question being, if my child wants to travel to another country over the break or over the course of the next 4 years, is it possible to get the travel or tourist visa for whichever country your child is going to in the United States? Most often, yes. There are instances for Schengen visas that become very complicated, either at the one of the country's consulates here in Chicago, or even visiting in visiting an embassy in Washington, D.C., where we would recommend, or that the student will find out quickly that it's not possible for whatever reason. Schengen regulation for specific, for certain citizens is becoming a little more difficult in terms of securing those visas, and may still require that your child is obtaining that visa at home, which brings up a great point, and it is as likely, or to the first summer, the second summer, your child may actually be home with you. So thinking through like the next 2-3 years, 4 years potentially, as we sit here today, about what your child is interested in terms of study abroad. Are there internship opportunities abroad, not necessarily here in the United States, but potentially in a third country, right? And what are the visa requirements, for those applications? Is it simply, a tourist visa? And can some of that actually be taken care of, for example, next summer, right? So it's a great question. It is possible, and it happens more often than it doesn't. And it is certainly, something. Being here in the city of Chicago makes it very easy to schedule those appointments or make those applications with the consulate, here in the city of Chicago. Yeah. Yep.
And you mentioned that the signature on the I-20 forms is only valid for 12 months.
Yes.
But if my son does not want to go abroad after 12 months, does he need to also get another signature?
Correct. Yeah. So the question being, after 12 months, does your student need to get an updated signature? And the answer is yes. And he or she can do that just by visiting the Office of International Affairs.
Even if he doesn't travel abroad?
Even if he doesn't travel abroad, if there's no travel plan, then there's no real reason for it. But I think it's one of those, be prepared moments in the event that all of a sudden, he's not thought about getting the travel signature, but then all of a sudden, decides to come home for some reason. We do, again, remind students of this, regularly. The Office of International Affairs sends out a monthly newsletter to students with reminders and developments, anything that's changed, on that basis, but certainly not required. Any other questions about travel? Yeah.
You mentioned, like at O'Hare, you have connections and they call you. What if you land in another international airport?
Yeah.
And there is a problem? What do they do at that point?
Yeah. So the question being, what if your child arrives at another airport in the United States and has trouble passing through customs or passport control? What happens then? Your student, again, will learn over the course of the next week that there is 24-hour assistance through what's called the Dean on Call program. In the event of an issue like that, that's happening after hours, or where U.S. Customs and Border Protection at another airport requires some additional information, your student should know that number, and you as parents can also learn and use that number as well. Because it's likely in those events that your child, may actually reach out to you before they may reach out to us. And what that means is that you can contact the Dean on Call, who will triage the call, and try to understand who can best help. Again, they have my cell phone number, and so they're always willing to use it, to make those types of calls. And when we can, when I can specifically, then I can reach out to whoever is creating the issue in whatever airport, in this country. Yeah. Good question. Yes?
When we land at Chicago Airport, for immigration, there are 2 lines. One is the physical verification and one is on the machine. So the staff doesn't ask you
Right.
which time. So what line should a student opt for?
Yeah, so the question is, specifically here at Chicago O'Hare, passing through customs, you have the option of using what's called Global Traveler, which Global Entry. Yeah, Nexus is another program I think that exists. Students arriving on student visas, and really anyone entering the United States, other than someone coming for business or tourism, will need to actually see an agent, right? So what that means is that your student can still use a kiosk, to go through through the process of scanning the passport and answering the questions. There's, given a receipt, and then using the receipt as well as the passport and the I-20, they will get in line to see the actual agent, the customs agent. Yeah, that's great. Yes?
Just curious, in the last 1 year, how many emergency calls do you have?
Yeah, it's a good. Well, I think we have to define emergency, right?
24/7 call.
Yeah. No, I mean it's not often, and we reference this form a program that we really support called Travel Smart, Travel Ready. So ensuring that students are aware of what they need. To answer your question, I received a call on Saturday evening, over the weekend, and it was a student who was unsure about traveling, at a moment's notice with an expired travel signature. And there are just those moments where, maybe the student in, heightened emotion and trying to get everything ready and collected, in order to go to the airport and catch a flight, especially if it's, as was the case Saturday, for a family emergency, there is some amount of urgency there. So that of course we don't mind. I don't mind, speaking to the student in that moment. But I would say over the course of an academic quarter, it's no more than 2 or 3 times, so it's pretty low. Winter break, and I will just say winter break for undergraduates, especially this first winter break, right? So your kid is going to have a great time over the course of, the next week with orientation. And then the first quarter, is going to be a lot of fun, meeting people still, trying to get settled, here in, not only the university, but in the city of Chicago. Everything's going to be new and exciting and everything else. And for most of them, they will then also be getting ready to travel home, right? In December, after the quarter ends, after exams end, there's going to be a lot of excitement to come home and see friends, but also family. And inevitably, winter break, the winter break is a high period of traffic, for everyone, because students forget, right? I had a student in December, I got to the airport and I don't have my passport, and it's like, well, I can't go to your, I can't go to your room and find your passport and bring it to you. You're going to have to reschedule, or come back and get it, et cetera. And again, I think that's where, working with you as parents, and just trying to, there is going to be this, fine line and balance in terms of separation, and you are an adult now and here and take care of everything. But we also depend on, moms and dads to say, like, don't forget your passport and don't forget your I-20, don't forget this, that, or that, don't forget your laundry, whatever the case might be, in terms of being prepared. So, yeah. Other questions just about travel? I know it's a big topic. You have our contact information. I've got business cards, so after today, if you do want or have follow-up questions, you can always reach out and get in touch with me. I know they're recording today's session, so I think that's available to you after as well. I want to talk just very briefly about work authorization. The idea of internships and other options over the course of your student's academic program becomes very very important. Not only for your students' learning, but also for prospects nearing graduation. And one of the things just in terms, and again, this is information that's shared with the students, but one of the things that we really like to convey to students, given the current political climate in this country, there is increased scrutiny on students who, or anyone who is working without prior authorization, right? Without permission or the requisite permissions or authorizations in order to take an internship. Whether the internship is paid or unpaid, it doesn't matter. The university will work with the student as well as the college to secure the actual appropriate authorizations. And the first thing I will just touch on is that the student visa, both F or J, will permit your student to work on campus. So your student can work on campus here at the university on a part-time basis without any prior authorization. So this is just an automatic benefit of being on a student visa. It's permitted, that your student will be able to work in the library or act as a tutor. We often have a lot of students, who tutor, other students, and that is permissible without prior authorization. The big caveat here, and the reason I bring this up again with parents is because we're partners here, is that the moment that your student starts to explore off-campus, off-campus opportunities, internships, externships, whatever the case might be, there may be some required permission or authorization, either issued by the university, or issued by the U.S. government, Citizenship and Immigration Services. And we can help navigate that process. We work, again, very closely with the Office of Career Advancement here at the University of Chicago and the college for what are called Metcalf internships. You may have read about the Metcalf program and others, to ensure that the student has what they need in order to actually participate in an internship while they're, in classes still. But then leading up to graduation, thinking about post-graduation employment authorization. So both F and J student visas carry with them post-graduation employment authorization, allowing a student to remain and work in the United States for a period of time, 12 months, typically 16 months, depending. And again, we will try everything to remind students, of this, and so long as you have the information, if you're hearing from your student that he or she has found, an internship of some kind, remind your student, check with the Office of International Affairs just to ensure that there's not something specific that you may need to do, in order to actually participate. There's a rule of thumb the government uses, and we often hear from students who get involved, with student groups, here at the university, whether it's, a consulting interest group or, financial banking interest group, and they actually do really interesting things, some of which, kind of borders on that line, of what is an official internship versus just student interest. And one of the things the government often, the rule of thumb here is, unless it's recreational, then you may need some avocational or recreational, you may need some permission, from the university or the government to participate. And again, we can help with that process. Any questions about that? Yes?
Sorry, does the CPT cut into the time that's given to you for the OPT?
Right. So the question, does the CPT time deduct from the OPT time at the end? And it does not, right? Yeah, it doesn't. So they are exclusive. And we encourage, more and more students are actually taking internships, especially, if not in their first summer, then in the second or the third for sure. Yeah. Good question, yes.
How long is the OPT and what determines that window that you have?
Right, so the question, how long is the OPT and what determines the window? The OPT is always issued for 12 months, right? 12 months is the standard period. There is currently what is called a STEM extension. You may have heard about this. The STEM extension for fields in science, technology, engineering, and math will extend that period by an additional 24 months, right? So up to 3 years of employment authorization. There isn't anything necessarily that determines the length there. It is a standard issued benefit, right? So it's always 12 months, unless the student knows that he or she only is going to complete 6 months, right? Then he or she might only apply for the 6. This becomes more prevalent, as we look at master's students, MBA students, others, who know they might actually accrue more than one master's degree, a master's degree in engineering, and then a few years later an MBA of some kind, right? And that's when, a student might choose to chop up that period of standard OPT because It is issued 12 months for each advance in academic level, but once you've used it at that academic level, it's no longer available. Good. Yes?
Who do we talk to about taxation?
Tax. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because we don't know how it would be.
Yeah. Join the club. I mean, we have a hard time understanding it. That and health insurance, for that matter. Yeah, so the question being, who do we contact for information about taxation? The Office of International Affairs, usually every mid-January, not long after the quarter has started, we will be reaching out to students to help them understand what their tax filing obligations or responsibilities are for the preceding year, right? So tax filing in the United States is done between January and mid-April of the year following the year that you are actually reporting, right? So your students, will likely receive information regarding tax filings in the United States in January of 2019 for this very short period of time that they've been here. Typically, for undergraduate students, that is simply filing a form that is indicating to the IRS, the Internal Revenue Services, which is the Bureau of Tax in the United States. Typically, for undergraduates, that is simply just filing something that says, I did not work, I had no earned income, that's it, right? Occasionally, and this will come up when your student has an internship, and especially if the internship is paid, if the internship is paid, the employer, right, who sponsored the internship will send to your child a report of earnings, right, for that brief period, 3 months, whatever it may have been, and also how much tax was withheld from those earnings. In the event that your student is owed a refund, which is more often than not, that's why the student files for the refund or the tax filing, between January and mid-April. In order to recover the overpaid taxes to the government, right? So the Office of International Affairs, again, not only do we send that information out, but we do provide some online tax assistance software that will kind of guide the student through that process, like what many Americans use is called TurboTax, which I think is probably not specific only to America, but in any case, it's similar, yeah.
So in that case, do they need to get an ITIN number before applying to the?
Right. So the question being about the individual tax identification number. So there are two tax identification numbers in the United States. The first is the individual tax identification number, the ITIN, and the second is the Social Security number, the SSN. The SSN is not applicable until your student has been offered a job, employment in the United States. At only that time can a student actually go to the Social Security Administration and apply for the SSN, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the ITIN itself would only be applicable if your student was actually receiving a scholarship or fellowship, right? And again, the Office of International Affairs will guide the student through that process and help file for the ITIN. The ITIN itself is, specifically for the disbursement of those funds. Again, from an IRS perspective, they want to know that there is some identifying information, to the tax filing. But the ITIN itself doesn't have a whole lot to do with the tax filing or the refund, right? It's only after you have an SSN, will you be indicating to the government that you had earned income, in the preceding year and that you paid tax on that income and are applying for the refund of overpaid tax. Yes?
What identification do they have to use when they're filing just their tax filing, even though they didn't earn any?
Yeah. So there's no identification that has to be sent in. The question being, what identification do they send in with that that form that is just indicating that there was no earned income, and there is really nothing else that goes with it. The form itself, I believe a passport, a copy of the passport is included, and that's it. Yeah. Yes.
I'm a little confused.
Yeah. It's ridiculously confusing, yes.
Yeah. So, when you say that for scholarships you get the ITIN, you need the ITIN number. So, but you say only when you have income you report an SSN number.
Correct.
So I think they are little disjointed.
So earned income, right? So you might have a fellowship or scholarship where you're receiving funds that are passing through the university, whether it's a scholarship that is endowed, externally, or even, coming from the university itself. And that, for tax purposes, is not to be considered as earned income. The difference there being that once you have a job or an internship where you're being paid a wage in some capacity and taxes are being withheld, that's when you can apply for the Social Security number.
Okay.
Yeah. And one quick thing, driver's license in the United States, yeah.
Sorry to put
Yeah.
the point, but
Yeah.
paid internship from the college, is that part of then would that require ITIN?
So, right, so the paid internship, so long as it's an internship that's not happening, well, even if it's happening on campus, that makes your student eligible for the SSN, right? So if your child finds a job at the library in the next month or so, or as a tutor, at that point, your student can actually apply for an SSN, right? It's only so long as they are receiving just the scholarship or the fellowship funding purely, right, that an ITIN is applicable. Yeah?
Kind of. Because you just said that if it's a scholarship, you don't require the ITIN. You just said you require, so I'm a little confused.
So for the scholarship or fellowship, you will file for an ITIN.
Okay.
If it's purely that. But if it's an internship or an on-campus job, then you apply for the SSN. Yeah. And it may be that early on your child will apply for the ITIN and then next summer or next year be eligible for the SSN and go through that application process.
Both of these applications will be handled by the Office of International Affairs?
It's not necessarily handled. We will help the student prepare the application, and then in the case of applying for an SSN, the student actually has to physically go to the Social Security Administration office, which is just a few blocks away from here, to make that application in person.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. So ITIN and SSN, and one final thing just about the SSN and driver's license. It's not terribly common for undergraduate students here to have a driver's license, but in the state of Illinois, because driver's license is governed by the state, a student is not eligible to apply for a driver's license in the state of Illinois until he or she has an SSN, right? So that's just a quick little point there. Yes? Should we could maybe talk just after the session? Yeah, okay, all right. So, yes,
So is there any other form of ID you can apply, like American ID, so they don't have to carry their passports around if they're not eligible to their...
yeah, no, it's a great question. Is there other state issued ID, that a student is eligible to apply for, so they don't have to carry their passport? There is a state ID card in the state of Illinois, but it is, for lack of a better word, useless. I mean, it's just not going to be terribly helpful to your student. Your student, over the course of the next week, if not already, will have received his or her university ID, which is, photo identification. It's not government issued, of course, but it is something, to be used. And otherwise, it's precarious, because otherwise students, especially as, they come of age in this country, to go to a bar, for example, getting into a bar without identification, especially in the city of Chicago, is very difficult. Impossible, actually. I mean, most bars will actually just tell you, without identification, you're not coming in. But that also means that a lot of our students, especially graduate students, master's students, are then carrying around their passports, right? And that just increases the probability for a lost, or left or stolen passport. And there's just not an easy way around that until the student is eligible for the SSN in order to apply for the driver's license. Yeah. Yep, it's a great question. One more of those points where it's like, helping your student understand, where to keep his or her passport at all times, whether it's, in a backpack or, in the dormitory, permanently, only unless he or she needs it, for some other reason. Yes.
What's the percentage of the undergraduates who can get the campus jobs or internships?
So the question, what is the percentage of undergraduate students who get internships?
The campus.
On-campus jobs, yeah. I don't think it's terribly high. I mean, there is a limitation that the university dictates that a student, not be working over 19 hours. So it's not terribly high. I don't know the exact percentage. I know that there are on-campus opportunities. Again, the library is a wonderful example. Tutoring. Eventually, for students, one other option is that as they get to know their professors, which is a very encouraged aspect of the American classroom culture, that they may have opportunities through their professors for research assistantships, or assistantships in general, where they might actually be helping, in the research or in, discovery phases, of different projects. Yeah. Sorry, I don't necessarily readily know that percentage. Any other questions? Yes.
It seems to me that the SSN is quite important. And because if the student doesn't work, he or she cannot apply for an SSN, right? So, I mean, if the student somehow try to find just a temporary job for a while in order to get the SSN,
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Yeah.
And for example, for the in-campus job, can he apply for SSN as well?
Yes. Yeah. So the question, the statement being that the SSN comes in very handy for a variety of different reasons. And as you've probably learned, even just opening bank accounts or opening cell phone, accounts, those types of things, that becomes, helpful. It's not impossible to do without an SSN. But the second part to that question being, if your child finds an on-campus job, right, again at the library or tutoring or for a professor or elsewhere, he or she will be eligible at that point for an SSN. And it is true that many students, will find a very quick job, short-term job, for that purpose, to obtain the SSN. Yeah.
But the contract for driver's license, so if you're not entitled, you have a driver's license, so as they have the ESCORTS number, then would they be illegal if they drive their overseas driver's license?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question being, if my child has an international let's be clear, a driver's license from home or an international driver's license. And the state of Illinois has published information about the validity of driver's license, coming from other countries or international driver's license. And at last check, the validity period for that driver's license is 6 months from the dated entry, right? So in this case, your child, may be able to either rent a car or drive legally for 6 months, from the date that he or she arrived in the United States.
First arrival or?
First arrival only, yeah. Yeah, that's based on the student visa, right? So that we're talking specifically about, entry on the student visa, not necessarily, coming and going as a tourist or visitor. Yeah.
So that's the problem, right? Because they don't allow the students to get a Illinois driver's license, but then they don't allow the students to use the overseas.
Right. Yeah, it's incongruent government bureaucracy, at its best. For sure. Yeah, and there's just no other way, it's total red tape, for sure. Yes, question here.
What if the license was issued in a different state?
So the question being, what if my child has a driver's license issued in another state? And so long as it's valid, your student can continue to use it.
More than 6 months?
More than 6 months, yeah. Yeah, driver's license has everything to do with residency, right? So if your child had residency in California, for example, and has a California driver's license, but is no longer going to be a resident in California, Illinois regulation would indicate that, within 30 days of you changing your residency from California to Illinois, you should be obtaining an updated driver's license in Illinois. Because your child has a driver's license from whatever state, theoretically he or she would have a Social Security number and be able to apply for the updated driver's license in the state of Illinois.
He doesn't have that social security.
So it may be that the state that he was in did not require that for the driver's license, but in Illinois it is required. So even if he were to go and apply for the updated driver's license, it would be rejected for not having the Social Security
He can
number.
still use his driver's license.
But he can still use the driver's license that he
It's
has.
temporary.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very complicated. Yes.
Without finding any job, can student apply for the SSN?
Without finding a job?
Yes.
So the question, if my child does not have a job, can he or she apply for the SSN? And the answer is no. You have to have been offered a job,
Then
and then you can apply for the SSN. Yeah. Other questions about that? Okay. I'm gonna talk briefly about safety and security. I think you may be receiving some of this, at a later time today. The University of Chicago boasts the largest private police force in America. I don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing. And you will see them. I mean, they are visible on campus. One of the things that we tell students is that you are in an urban setting, right? This is a university in a very urban environment. And as we all know, Chicago doesn't have always the best reputation. I mean, America doesn't, in general, around things like gun violence and other types of things. But we do take this very seriously at the University of Chicago, and you will notice not only the police presence, but you'll see here on the right side of the screen these emergency call towers or blue light towers, and these are actually placed all over campus. And in the event that your child, needs either immediate medical attention or feels threatened, for his or her personal safety, by hitting the red button on that tower, an immediate notification goes to the University of Chicago Police Department, and they're kind of descending on that location wherever it might be. Just in terms of emergency assistance, for absolute medical emergencies or, again, safety emergencies, 911 is the number that is dialed in this country, and by doing that, you're actually alerting the police department, ambulance services, so medical services, as well as fire services. So all three, for better or for worse, all three of them, show up when you dial 911. On campus, by dialing 123, you are actually transmitted directly to University of Chicago Police Department. As I mentioned, the red button, and there are other methods for connecting with emergency services. The university has a yes.
could you just define on-campus phones?
Right. On-campus phones meaning, phones in offices or buildings. I don't think any of the dormitory rooms at this point have actual phones in them, but, there's a phone at the front desk of this building, for example. Yeah. The university has a very robust, safety escort system, so in the event that your child is studying with friends, and doesn't want to and should not walk home alone, late at night, and lives maybe on the south side of campus where he or she may have been studying on the north side, the student can actually request a safety escort from one place to the other, which is a terrific program as well. Protecting property and shuttle services. There are a variety of resources on the handout that you have specific to the actual UChicago app, which again kind of outlines all of these things, as well as free shuttle transportation that run consistently, around campus, but also connect campus to CTA, L trains, as well as metro trains that go up into the city. We recommend students, if they get a bicycle, that they are registering that bicycle with University of Chicago Police, as well as a laptop. The laptops can be barcoded so that, in the event that they are stolen and potentially recovered, then they can be returned to their owner. Any questions? Yes.
Do you mean not only register your bike, but also register your laptop?
Correct. Yeah.
To where?
University of Chicago Police. Yeah, that's where they will actually be doing that. And they'll set up over the course of the next week, a couple of weeks into the start of each quarter, they set up, little stations all over campus to register bikes. And your student can register his or her laptop in the library as well. Yeah. Yes?
Is it 24 hours?
The night ride shuttle, I don't think it is 24 hours, but the safety escort is. So in the event, that you might need safety escort, later in the evening, you can use that service. Again, I think just in terms of safety and security, one of the things that your students will be hearing over the course of the next week, is a reminder that this is an urban environment, but also, that they need to be aware of their surroundings. I can't tell you how often I see students wandering around with, their headphones in. If you have headphones in, then you're not, you're not going to be aware of your surroundings. You're not going to be aware of what's behind you or be able to hear, what's going on. So not that you can't use it, maybe use only one headphone instead of both. But again, one of those partnership moments, if you can also convey to your students that, that they need to be aware, and in order to do that, wearing both headphones is not conducive. Same thing if, your student is, studying late at night or with friends late, ensuring that they're walking home in, groups and not alone, right? Not just two people, but we, recommend 3, 4, 5, the more people, the better. Especially if students are not willing to use the safety escort or the shuttles, Uber, there are a lot of other options for getting around or getting, for example, from Harper Court, back to campus, and those things are important. This seems to be coming up more and more, and we seem to be hearing about it, more and more. And there is, this telephone and online scam, system that seems very prevalent. And I mean, some of the stories that you hear from people about, being scammed are just absolutely awful. But convey to your student that a government agency will never contact, your student by telephone and demand or extort money out of them in order to actually provide some assistance, or safeguard, right? We try to, hammer this home, quite a bit, but just, ensuring that students are aware that his or her country's consulate or embassy here in the United States, or U.S. Citizenship Immigration Services, the Department of Homeland Security, the police department, the IRS, no one is going to contact you by telephone and demand that you are, or indicate that you are in violation of, some rule or law, and then demand money from you. Yes?
Are there any incidents in the past that students use Uber and maybe from the downtown area to the University of Chicago or from the University of Chicago to the downtown area, they feel unsafe?
So the question is about Uber or Lyft, so ride-sharing, services. I'm not aware of there being issues, reported by students coming from downtown, back to campus, or from campus, to the downtown Chicago area. I think more often, students are using Uber and Lyft, and more often they're going with, several friends. I know that both companies have had, some trials and challenges, recently with, just overcharging, and that kind of thing. And occasionally we hear of those things, but not in terms of personal safety. That certainly has not come up per se. Yeah. Good. Any other questions about that, safety or security? So the last thing, really, again, as I mentioned, we are here, of course, to serve your student. We are here on the ground every day, and in the event that he or she needs something, they are encouraged to come to the Office of International Affairs. If there are immigration-related questions, travel, internships, students can actually come to the office without an appointment. They're more than welcome to make an appointment, but they can also come without an appointment, kind of drop-in advising or walk-in advising. And then I would encourage you as parents, if there are things that after today's session you have follow-up questions about, to please feel free to either contact myself or you can send an email to the email that you see there and it will be routed, directly. Yes, question?
Thank you for all those information. And would you please go back to the slide that shows information about emergency and hospital needs?
Hospital, yeah, sure, definitely. This one, yep.
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be sure to share the presentation out. I'll be in touch with the college programming office. There was a question back here, yes?
I have a question, might be unrelated to you, but if you could just direct us. In case of a medical emergency where, a doctor or someone needs to take a decision or a call for a procedure, or any decision needs to be made where a family member or someone needs to be contacted. How is that procedure to be sort of navigated currently while it's being?
Yeah, so the question being, in the event of my child requiring immediate medical assistance, and decisions need to be made by the medical personnel who is actually contacted in those events. Your information is going to be present in the student's record, right? So as parents, an emergency contact information, you will be contacted. Of course, in the event that you are or cannot be contacted immediately, I don't know what the legal answer there is. I think what often happens is that whatever can be done in the student's health interest, right? But that you will be contacted just as soon as possible. Yeah, I think that there are some follow-up sessions today, but also your students will be getting some of that information, especially as it pertains to health services here on campus. So one of the things to keep in mind is that health services is a full, fully staffed clinic, and pharmacy and the counseling services there as well. But, students will always be able to get medical attention there and be then referred if needed, to outside specialists or to the hospital as the case might be. There's a wonderful hospital here on campus as well that works very closely with the university. So I realize that doesn't fully, there's that kind of, moment, that you're wondering about, what if I can't be reached and what then happens? And I think that that's one of those things that, we will try to reach you before any decision, is made. Yeah.
So I have to travel 20 hours to get here in emergency. So is there any system whereby we can have a contact of somebody who we trust locally with the university in addition to information to our child?
Yeah. So in the event of an emergency where you have a trusted contact who is closer, right, than you might be. Situationally, as I've experienced these types of situations, we are going to work with whoever. So if your child has a sibling, in the United States, or an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, that person, by your, definition, will become part of that communication.
So where do we register that?
So
in case my child is not in a position to
Right, it wouldn't be registered specifically. It could be listed as an emergency contact, but I would recommend that you, as the parent, remain the emergency contact. By contacting you, then you can bring in, the third person. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Question. We talked about the passport being the identity card that we carry around. Can national identity cards, which have photograph, would that work?
That is typically sufficient. Government issued photo identification.
Even if it's in a foreign language?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it depends on where the student is going. You know, to you know, one of Chicago's oldest bars, I wouldn't suggest taking something in another, you know, in another language. I don't think the bouncer will actually, you know, get that. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah. Yes.
I have two questions. First question is the hospital clinic, it's the university clinic that students can go to.
Yes.
They have flu or cold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Student Health Services is on campus and is a full clinic, right? So with not only nurses and doctors, but a pharmacy, and your student can go there. That is, to me, that should be your student's first stop. So if it's the common cold or the flu or something like that, and you know, the student just wants to see the doctor, that is the place to go, right? It's close. It accommodates students, you know, at all times of the day, and is a wonderful resource on campus. In the event that the student needs additional or further medical assistance, Student Health Services can then, you know, refer your student, you know, out to specialists.
So is this part of the insurance policy, or this is part of?
It is part of the, right, so the Student Health Center is covered by the student UChip plan, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, that is the best place to start, especially for health insurance purposes, you know, in the United States. Starting with University Health Services, you know, for referral, you know, adheres to kind of the process that someone should follow for health insurance coverage over the course of that process. Yes?
Sure. My second question, I understand that there is privacy protection in the state of Illinois. So that's why I think when our students, if they have any medical conditions, and that the doctors and hospitals, they will not be able to disclose the information to the students.
So it is, yeah, so you are, you know, disclosure of personal information, and this is a thing in America, you know, after 18, even if you are directly related as a parent, you know, parent to child, you know, disclosure of medical records specifically, you know, would not be legal. But where your student has designated you as the emergency, you know, point of contact, the university will be in connection, you know, or contacting you and working through that process. It's not that you will be, you know, excluded from those decisions, especially in the event that, you know, your student, for whatever reason, you know, might not be able, you know, to have those conversations on his or her behalf.
Do we need them to sign any forms?
Right.
Such that, yeah.
No, unless you want access to your student's, you know, medical record, you know, over the course of, you know, his or her 4 years here. So in other words, for emergencies, you don't need any sort of pre-signature. I don't, you know, I think to be clear, thinking about, you know, your son or daughter's medical record, and what that, you know, what access to that, you know, needs to be, right? It's not that you may need access to your son or daughter's, you know, entire medical record over the course of the 4 years. Maybe you would like it, and that would be a conversation that you have with your child. But for emergency services, that's not going to be necessary. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Other questions? All right, I know you have a packed morning and a wonderful rest of the day, so welcome again, and thank you for your attention and for coming so early this morning. Thank you.